Welcome to the Business of Widows, real stories of grief, grace, and God's goodness. I'm your host, Abigail Peterson, and this is a special space for those who are walking through the unimaginable. Here we share honest, unfiltered conversations with widows and widowers who have lived through deep loss, yet have encountered God's presence in the middle of their pain. Each episode reminds you that your grief is real, your story matters, and you are not alone. So take a deep breath, come as you are, and join us as we explore heartbreak, healing, holy moments, and the unexpected goodness of God, one story at a time. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second episode of the Business of Widows podcast. And today I'm privileged to have a very good friend with me. Her name is Sister Tina Galaviz. Hello, sis.
Hello, Sister Abbie.
I'm so grateful to have you as my first official guest. And why it's so meaningful to me is that 2 years ago, you lost your husband, Brother Jose. And I was able to, since we have been in church together for over 25 years and have been through many different seasons of our lives together, I was able to be there when Brother Jose passed away and be there for you, not knowing that just 14 months later, I would lose Jeremy and you would be there for me. Mm-hmm. So we share a very special bond, and I wanted to have you on as my first guest because we have shared a lot about being widows. So I know you very well, but I would love for you to share yourself and your love story with Brother Jose and anything that you'd like to share. Please go ahead and share with our audience today.
First, I just want to thank you for, choosing me. I was a little reluctant at first because I just felt that my story wasn't, we were just regular saints in the church. We didn't have a position in the church. So I was very honored when you asked me, to do your first podcast. So thank you for that. And, I met Jose. He had worked with my sister. And I had met him through my sister, and we worked together. And, I don't want to, I could go a day by day, but I won't. So I ended up dating him, and then I ended up marrying him, but he wasn't in the church. And I already knew the standards in our church, what was expected. And so I didn't tell my pastor for like 3 months. I was married to Jose for like 3 months. And I didn't tell pastor. So I finally had to tell him that I was married. So he kind of just said, okay, well, what's done is done. And one of the things that I would always invite Jose to church, and I would say, oh, do you want to go to church? And he would always say, why do I want to go to church? I'm going to hell. And I would be like, well, that's why you go to church, so you don't go to hell. And I was, spending a lot of time missing church and everything. And one of the things that you had told me and really touched my heart is that, you called me and you basically said, you're missing a lot of church. And I said, I know. And you said, well, how do you expect to win your husband if you're not even faithful to the house of God? And that just struck my heart like a bow and arrow. Like I was just pierced in my heart. And I thought, that's so true. How do you expect to be an example if you take living for the Lord just I don't know what that word is, lackadaisical or whatever.
Lackadaisical.
Just take it for granted, yeah, thank you. And so I did make a rededication that day after you told me, and I said, you know what, Lord, I'm going to live for you. And if my husband doesn't live for you, I'm going to put you first. And through that, and that dedication that I made to the Lord, it paid off, because he ended up, I would invite him, and I remember inviting Brother Gustavo and Sister Leah over, and he had met them, and he really connected with them. And then I think they had asked him if they wanted to do a Bible study. They had asked him if he wanted to do a Bible study, and he said yes. And so they gave him the Bible study. So the Lord opened up his heart. He always used to say, my heart is so black, I don't think the Lord can ever touch my heart. But he did. He got baptized in Jesus' name and was filled with the Holy Ghost, And so, the Lord will honor your dedication. You might not see it right away, but the Lord will keep his promises. And and that's my love story. And so many things, and we lived our life, for the Lord. My kids were not his kids, but he loved them like they were. And we both made that dedication to live for the Lord and raise them in church. So I'm just so thankful for that. And, I always thought about COVID and people that would have all these relationships that would break up during COVID, and I thought that was so weird because my relationship wasn't that. It's like, man, I loved being home, just staying with my spouse. And I think that's just in our culture. We spend so much time in the apostolic culture with our spouses. I mean, I'm sure there's other people, but there's just a connection. We have the love of the Lord. We have our church family, we have our natural family, and we spent a lot of time with the church. Our vacations were with the church, going on camp meetings or just meetings. So I mean, and so anyway, fast forward. I don't want to take up too much time. He passed away. So I just I loved our lives. I couldn't
Mhm.
say, did we have trials? Of course. My husband was ill for like maybe the last 5 years of our relationship. So it was hard for him, and it was hard for us and as a family to see him suffer so much.
So, Brother Jose, you mentioned, was sick during the last 5 years of your marriage, and he, but his death still was untimely, wasn't expected, was more of a tragic passing, and it was October 23rd of 2023. So, what did you find the hardest to navigate after your loss?
You know, After Jose passed away, I think just navigating day to day life, just one of the things that I missed, one of the things, you come home and you expect to see your spouse, you go to work, expect to share your day with them, like, if you were frustrated or guess what happened today at work, and that was just so hard for me. It's like you go to work, you come home and you're just like, who do I share my life with now? And that
Mhm.
was so hard for me because it's like you don't have that person, your best friend to share any of your day with, whether it be good or bad.
Right.
And so I find that hardest, and I still find that hard.
Hmm.
I still find
Yes.
that hard today, So that's what I found the hardest. Is it every day? It is every day because, I just expect to come home you know, and get a hug or just even physical, like, just, how was your day? A hug or something. That's gone.
Right. Right. And I think that those of us that are widows, and if there's any widowers that are listening, we can totally empathize with that same sentiment. Not having your person, that's what I say, is not having your person to communicate with, to share your future, to share just the simplicity of life, and that's gone. And while many of us have kids, but they play a different role. And one of the things that has been in the forefront of my mind has been, I don't want to put pressure on my kids to try to fill that void because they can't fill that position of their
Right.
dad. And so, are there
Right.
any traditions that you have kept or let go of?
Traditions. When me and Jose, Thanksgiving was a really big part of our, one of the traditions we really kept, So, he would make, we didn't really care for turkey, so he would make a prime rib. And I mean, that was his time to shine. He would make it, and, he was proud of how it came out and everything. And so I do try to keep Thanksgiving. I do try to keep Thanksgiving with my kids. I mean, I don't make prime rib, and I don't. I didn't feel like the last 2 years I didn't cook anything, but I purchased some stuff from Albertsons, and I did still keep the tradition of having Thanksgiving at my house or with my family, but I didn't make anything. And I don't know if I'll ever get there, of actually making that stuff. But, I'm not opposed to it. I'm just not ready for that. And so that I did keep, that Thanksgiving. He wasn't a big person on his birthday. He didn't really like celebrating his birthday either. But one of the things just to honor him is I do go, even I know that he's with the Lord, I just go to the cemetery, and that's more for me, of
Hmm.
course, not for him, just to change out his flowers or decorate, his grave site. But that's more for me, not for him. And I just feel like that's just something small I can do in honoring him and by honoring him. And that's what I do.
Now, how has widowhood changed your identity? I know this is a very, I almost feel like this is a can of worms because we could talk about this for days, but in what ways has widowhood changed your identity?
Well, you're married for so long and you're just a couple. You're a married couple. And even in church, you look around and there's the young marrieds, the old marrieds, the singles, the kids, and here you are. Where do you fit in? Where do I fit in?
Hmm.
That's what I want to say. Where do I fit in? It's like, you always feel like that third wheel. So a couple invites you out and you're like, you're this third wheel. And it's hard to try to find. And I think I'm still navigating that. Like, where do I fit in? And it's not even, I don't think it's you get invited and it's like you're this third wheel, and it's like I feel that way. I don't think they feel that way, but like they don't think they're, how would I say, they don't think anything of it, but I feel that like I don't fit in, like I'm a puzzle piece trying to find where I fit in this place. I
Hmm.
just don't fit, and I'm trying to fit, and but I don't know where I fit, but I just have to trust the Lord that he has a plan for me. He's going to fill that void where I don't feel like I fit in, and I have to trust the Lord, but I
Hmm.
am still trying to find where I fit in, because I'm not a couple. I'm not a duo or not a team. I'm a solo player, that
Hmm.
that hasn't found my place yet, to tell the truth.
And I feel too, when you, the very first time that you check that widow box, it really hits you. It hit me. And I never thought I would ever have to check this box. And you really are,
Yeah.
you recognize that your identity is not who you were, 2 years ago or 3 years ago or 6 months ago, wherever you are in your journey. Your identity has changed, but in your mind you're still trying to reconcile, I was married and now how am I
In
not married now?
in my mind, I think I am married. I think I am married. In my mind, I'm married. It's like I'm Jose's wife still.
Hmm.
I'm still his wife. I'm not I had to go do my taxes for the first time as a widow. And exactly that. You have to, like, well, you're not a married, you're not a single, you're a widow. And I'm like, that's what I am. I'm a widow. And, and society, when you're a married couple, that's the norm, that's kind of like accepted, and then when you're the widow, and they're like, oh, widow, it's like, I don't even think there's, it's not, that's not normal to be a widow,
Right.
to be married or single, that's normal,
Hmm.
or that's what our society considers normal. So I feel like kind of like the widow gets forgotten about,
Right.
so I'm kind of, it's very, or have a blessing that you have this platform to showcase, not, to for widows to have somewhere to be recognized.
Absolutely. And you mentioned taxes. And so what's something besides taxes that you've had to learn how to do on your own?
Oh, Jose took care of all the bills, and he was old fashioned where he would write a check and mail them out. So one of the things, and he had his little system by his bedside, and he would have all the envelopes lined up and the date they were due. And, when I said, and I don't know who I told, somebody, I must have told you or Sister Lucia, I go, I don't even know how to pay these bills. I don't even, I haven't wrote a check since I was, 20 probably, so I had to learned to do that, but I did it online. I was an old fashioned. It's like, let's get with it. So I had to learn how to pay my own bills. Of course, when I say pay, I just mean, of course, I contribute to the house. I had a job, but
Right.
to pay the bills, the simple things, you don't realize how much your spouse does. And one of the things that
Mhm.
my husband did, because he was disabled towards the end of his life, and he didn't, one of the things that hurt him the most was not being able to provide for his family and work anymore. I think
Mhm.
for a man that just kills them. For most
Mhm.
men that are want to support their families, when they can't work anymore, it takes a lot away from them. So one of the things he used to do for us is like sweep the floor, put our laundry in the dryer. He would fold it because he was home. And one of the things we miss in those little simple things, you don't realize how much they do when you just, I don't want to say take for granted, but you just forget that they do those little things. And those are the little things that we had to learn how to do on our own, because we didn't do them. We didn't do them. He would have our clothes done. The floor would be swept. So
Mhm.
I mean, he did more than that, but I'm just saying that those are simple things that we missed, that we never were. I don't want to say grateful because we were grateful, but we just took them for granted, I would say.
And it becomes everybody has plays a role, your husband played a role, you played a role.
Right.
I never had to worry about our vehicles. I never worried about oil changes. I never worried about tires. I never worried about any of those things. And after Jeremy passed away, all of a sudden, just probably within a month after he passed away, my check engine light came on. And thank goodness we have someone in the church who has an auto body shop that specializes
Hmm.
in European vehicles. And so I went to that person and I started crying and I said, my check engine light is on and I don't know what to do. And so I ended up bringing my car into his shop and he went through it and he's like, it's nothing to worry about. But you have a nail in your tire. And I would have never looked at that. It's just not something that ever
Right.
came into my sphere of thinking about because
Hmm.
Jeremy did that. And so navigating
Right.
those things now
He
that
would have known.
he would have normally noticed and taken care of now, and thank goodness we both have people in our life, we both have grown children and they do, they try to support and help
Right.
the best that they can. And I still have, my dad and my
Right.
stepmom and they support. And then of course we do have people in the church who, if we asked, they would definitely, step out and help. And so I'm grateful for that. But it just makes you think about all of the things, like you said, that you kind of take for granted. And that you
Yes.
kind of just assume, like, I
Yes.
don't, I would never have to worry about registering the
Right.
vehicles.
Right.
Um, what is
Right.
something,
Oh,
ano-
we haven't registered one of our big vehicles. We haven't
um,
registered one of our vehicles. I hear that's a nightmare. So,
and that is another thing I've thought about with this podcast and, is a checklist. Because when you go through
hmm,
something such as being a widow, there are so many things beyond just life insurance that you have to think about. And
hmm,
that is having
right,
vehicles in one person's name or in having them in both of your name. It also has turned out to be kind of a nightmare situation for me. Now I just got it taken care of, but it wasn't a simple fix. And so I've thought about that. I've thought about,
right.
well,
And they haven't been.
maybe we should create a checklist of things to think about. But then again, that almost sounds like macabre and everybody thinks, well, I won't need it until you do. What is something un- unhelpful, if I can say use that terminology, that people often say or have said to you, something that is not helpful? Because those we have people that are listening that are not widows and not widowers.
Right.
Maybe, they're just listening because they're friends of ours, or maybe they're just listening to
Hmm.
listen. So, what are some things that have been said to you that have been unhelpful?
I don't know if they weren't helpful, but I just felt this one, and I know that people are trying to sympathize with me, but, and so they would say, oh, I'm sorry for your loss, right? And then they would say, well, I lost my aunt the other day. And so then they go on and talk about their aunt, and then and here it's like they start crying, and then I find myself comforting them in their loss of who they lost. And I just, if I could give any advice in that, I would just say, don't try to relate. I mean, you, because that's just human nature to relate.
Hmm.
You can always say you're sorry for your loss, but ask something about whoever they lost. If you lost your husband, oh, how long were you married? Because that would give him some life, even though they don't know him. It would comfort. I felt like it would be more comforting to me if you asked me about Jose. If you
Hmm.
asked me, oh, how long were you married? Oh, I don't know. I just can't think of any questions now, but like, how long were you married? Oh, have you lived in Vegas? How long were you I don't know. Just questions about your spouse, and they don't have to be, you know, long. I mean, they wouldn't even known his name. You could have been asked their name. Like most of my coworkers at work don't know my husband's name, but they would tell me they were sorry for my loss. Just simply, oh, what was your husband's name? That even would be comforting to me, just because I would be able to say his name.
Hmm.
And that I just feel like is more important, just to ask about the lost loved one than trying to sympathize with them. So I
Hmm.
try to remember that when I find out somebody has lost somebody. One of my coworkers had lost her mom, and I try to remember, I'm sorry for your loss, but, what was your mom's name? And then she told me, and then I said, oh, where did you grow up? Just a little, so we could get a little insight of how they they cherish that person, I guess.
I think that's great advice. I do, because, and it's something that you and I have talked about, and I also have tried to do when now I encounter people who have suffered loss, and I will ask them, oh, tell me something special about your husband, or tell me. I had somebody recently who shared the loss of a child, and I said, oh, tell me something special about your child. And that makes people
Right,
feel a little bit more secure and less like they have to comfort you when you're sharing your grief,
right,
and sharing your story,
right.
as you also said. What has loss taught you about love?
Oh, you know, I think you just need to really love people, love, because it's too late to go back and say, I shoulda, woulda, coulda.
Hmm.
You shoulda, coulda, did. You should do it now. And so don't take that love for granted either. It's like, when you lose your loved one, your husband, you like, oh, I should have did this. I should have did that. I should have did this. So I think we just got to love them while we can, because tomorrow they may not be here, and
Hmm.
life's too short, and nobody's promised tomorrow. And I feel like, I know we're human, we get upset and everything. And one of the things that, when my husband passed, I remember being upset with him because, he had passed away in when we were on vacation in the hotel room. And, it was just a lot to deal with. We were tired from the flight, and I just wanted to go to sleep, and something had happened. So I had to hurry up and clean up all this mess. And I was just really frustrated. And so then he ended up passing away, and I had a lot of guilt for that. I had a lot of guilt for that.
Hmm.
But, I think the Lord gave me some peace in that, because he said, you have no say in taking a life,
Hmm.
or or you don't have power like that. I have the power. And so the Lord said, I give life and I take life, you don't. And I felt, and when somebody had just recently sent this to me, and I thought, man, that's so good, that my God is intentional.
Hmm.
God's intentional when he does these things. And I that just really moved me. And I don't think I've had it. Maybe I had heard it before. I just didn't take it in. And when they said it this time, I thought, man, that's so good. God doesn't do anything without a plan. He knows
Mhm.
the plan, you know. And one of the plans after Jose had passed, and I know that my sister got saved and his sister-in-law got saved, and they were both baptized in Jesus' name and got the Holy Ghost. And I don't think Jose's death had brought that on, because my sister stayed with me for like 3 weeks, and his sister-in-law came to the funeral, which wasn't even talking to his side of the family,
Mhm.
and she got saved. You know, she reconnected with somebody, and they invited her to church, and she got saved in Holy Ghost. And I thought, you know, God does have a plan. You know, two I feel like two souls were saved because
Mhm.
of Jose. And
Mhm.
even though he didn't see it, you know, his life reflected, you know, this is, you know, we lived this life for many years in front of both of them, you
Mhm.
know. And it makes you reflect when somebody passes away, and that reassurance that we have with the Lord. And I think the funeral, people can see that, like, we're not sad. We're sad because we lost him, but we have a hope beyond this life. And I feel like that was the most beautiful thing that came out of that.
And I think one of the questions that we talked about for today was, what does trusting God look like on hard days? And I think you just answered that question, because reminding
Yeah,
yourself of what God has done since Brother Jose has passed is an example of
right,
trusting God. Like, even though this has happened, I still trust you, God, that you're going to come through, because I've seen what you've already done. I've seen how you've already kept me. I
right.
see the miracles that has happened. So what brings you joy today?
You know, bring me joy. I would just say, like, the Lord brings me joy. The Lord, because I have a lot of faith that the Lord has a plan for me. You know, this is just a new chapter, and the Lord is going to figure it out. And when I go to church, I love going to church because I can worship freely. And, you know, I don't want to take my life for granted, because I'm not, you know, one day I won't be here. And I just want to live my life pleasing to the Lord. And that gives me joy, to serve the Lord and help others. You know, sometimes we're a help, like doing this podcast. If I can help somebody, or
Mhm.
somebody can relate to my story, that brings me joy. You know, I shared with you the other day, because you had put your podcast, and I know that we talked about this, but that sister that texted me from California, I'm like, that's amazing, Lord. Those things bring me joy. When the Lord gets the glory for the things that happen through this, I that brings me joy.
I agree. I
That
agree.
brings me joy.
And that also lends itself to the question how relationships and friendships change when you're going through tragedy, where you're going through situations and ultimately become a widow or a widower. And I know for us, our relationship has changed. Like I said at the beginning of the podcast, we've been friends for over 25 years. You saw me when I was a brand new mom, and then you've been a part of
Hmm.
my journeys as I had, our second child and third child. And when my mom passed away, you were there. And then I've watched your children grow up. I used to hold your second son when he was 2.5, 3 years old, and he used to sing at the top of his lungs in church. And so our friendship has evolved over the years, but now we're both in this place. And so, how has relationships and friendships changed for you since over the last 2 years
Well,
since
I feel
losing
like
Brother Jose?
I think some friendships have. I think some people are just afraid to bring up Jose's name, you know, or talk about it, because they think they're going to make me cry. And they, you know, sometimes I do cry, but it's not
Hmm.
out of sadness, but it's just like I remember that memory, and
Hmm.
it you know, that's why you cry, not because, I don't think because you're sad, but I think some people feel like, you know, they keep their distance, and then other people draw nearer because they know, well, like me and you know, it's like some people draw near and some people fade away, and I think, one of the things I remember you telling me when I first was a widow, that, you're going to see like some people will check up on you at the beginning and then they go back to their lives, but you're still stuck in that same, you're still staying in the same place because you're just grieving. And I remember you telling me that in the beginning, and everybody goes back to their lives, and they forget about you. That not that they forget about you, but they go to their lives. They have their own lives to
Hmm.
live. We're even talking about our children. They have to live their own lives.
Hmm.
They go on, they live their lives, and they go back to work and they do their thing, and here you are just stuck. Stuck in this place in the beginning. So I think with friendships, it's the same thing. Like, I don't want to say, they just have their own lives, and I get that. I get that everybody has their own lives that they have to go to, but I would also say just check up on your friends that are widows, once in a while. Just, hey, how are you doing? Thinking about. You don't even have to say anything. Just say, I'm thinking about you, praying for you. That means a lot. That those simple words, like, I'm thinking about you today.
Hmm.
I'm thinking about you today, and you're in my prayers, and it's like, thank you, Lord. Thank you for sending me that message from that saint. That means a lot. So, friendships do change, and it's just part of it.
Hmm.
It's part of it. It's part of it. It's sad, but it is part of it. You lose some friendships and you grow closer to others, but that's just part of it.
That's
It's not
that's
unusual.
very true. It's very true. What advice would you give to a new widow?
I would say, to a new widow, I would just say, the Lord's faithful. Just keep trusting the Lord, and he'll be that strength for you. And even though, how do I say this? Even though you may, grief changes over time, of course, when you're first widow, you're very sad, and it gets less, I don't want to lessened, or it just changes, the grief changes.
Hmm.
So be patient, be, you know if you're not okay, let people know you're not okay. Those people that are asking you, um that, oh, how are you today, be honest and say, I'm not okay today, pray for
Hmm.
me. I'm not okay, I'm having a rough day. Because if they don't know, everybody sees you smile, let's say it
Hmm.
that way. Everybody sees you smile, and and they think, oh, she's okay, she's okay, she's laughing, she's smiling. But there are some people that really can tune into you and be very like, how are you today? And you say, I'm okay, and they'll look at you and they'll be like, are you okay? And then you're
Hmm.
like, I'm having a rough day, and it's like, just be honest, I guess, because if you're honest, just be honest and say, I'm having a rough day, or just pray for me. Please pray for me, or the favorite line, I'm alive, when you don't have anything else to say. Or if you say, I'm alive, most of the time it's because you're not doing okay, and just pray for me, and that's my advice, is just reach out to the people you trust and ask for prayer, because they're there for you, and they're not going to leave you. They're going to hold your hand, and they're going to sit with you when you want to just cry and you don't want to talk. You just want to
Hmm.
sit there, and you just need them to hold your hand. You don't need want to talk, hold on to those friends that really support you, because you're going to need them.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I was, as you were talking, I was thinking about a social norm that happens in society everywhere, in all countries, I feel like, is, oh, how are you? Fine. I'm fine.
Mhm.
It becomes just a part of us, you know. Um,
Mhm. Right.
and the reason why I say it happens in all, countries, in all societies, is I was thinking of, my daughter-in-law, her parents only speak Spanish, and so when I see them, all I know is "Cómo está?" Muy bien,
Mhm.
and there,
Right.
that's all I know, but that's a commonality, right? How are you? I'm
Right.
fine. And so it's in our nature. And many times people will say to us, how are you? Because it's a greeting,
Right.
But when
Right.
you
Yeah.
go
Right.
through tragedy, when you go through the loss of someone, it hits a little different when they say, how are you? Because I find myself,
Mm-hmm.
as you already mentioned, I learned to say, well, I'm alive, because I'm not fine.
Mm-hmm.
I'm alive. I am
Right.
here. And there's somebody in
Right.
our church that she said, I'm going to stop asking you that. And I just kind of laughed and tapped her on the back. And I said, it's okay. I said, I know. She's like, it's just a habit. And I said, I know. I said, but for
Mhm.
me, I don't want to say I'm fine, because I'm really not fine, but I am alive. So,
Right. Right.
so, and
Right.
that's something to consider, when you're greeting people who have gone through something. To me, one of the best things people can say to me has been, I just want to let you know I've been praying for you. Instead of saying, hey, how are
Yeah.
you?
Amen.
When they say, I just want to let
Right.
you know that you've been on my mind, and your family's been on my mind. And I just want to let you know that,
Right.
we've been praying for you. That is so heartfelt to me. That is, I would rather
Right.
somebody say that than ask me how I'm doing. Because sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I
Right.
don't know how to respond to that.
Right.
Thank you for joining me today, Sister Tina. And as we wrap up our podcasting conversation today, are there any final thoughts or words that you could share about grief and growth and healing with our listeners today as we end?
I would just say trust in God. Your strength is not going to come from you. It's going to come from the Lord, because you can't do it by yourself. And
Mhm.
then that's all. His plan for you, he hasn't finished. He's still writing that chapter. So for me, just you got to hold on to the Lord, and you got to grow your strength through the Lord. And that's what I would say. I if I didn't have the Lord, I don't know what would happen, because I have to put my trust in him. And on those hard days, just say, Lord, I'm trusting you today, Lord, because that's all I have. I have only you to lean on. And he's the author and finisher of our lives. And that's my advice. Hold on to the Lord, and, seek him when you're not at your best, or when you're at your saddest, I guess. That would be my advice. Just hold on to the Lord.
Thank you, Sister Tina, for being with me today. Thank you for supporting me. Thank you for being a friend that has just been a source of strength for me and to my family. The amount of support that you've given us over this last year has been a blessing, and I hope that I as well have been a blessing to you. And that, again, it was a privilege having you as my first guest on the Business of Widows podcast. And I just want to let you know that I love you, and that you're always on my mind. I'm always thinking of you, and I pray that your journey and your story can be a blessing to others.
I hope it's a blessing. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Widows. If today's conversation brought you comfort, clarity, or hope, I invite you to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with another widow or widower who might need it. Remember, you are loved, you are seen, and you don't have to walk this road alone. Join me next time as we continue sharing real stories of grief, grace, and God's goodness, because healing is holy and hope is still alive.